Hello, 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 everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. My name is Alexa WiIlliams. I use she, they pronouns, and I am a part of the Media 2070 team. And on behalf of the entire team, I just want to welcome you to our live stream today. And if this is your first time, you found us on socials, anything like that, and you're unfamiliar with Media 2070, we're a project that launched in 2020 that does the work of uncovering media harms and working towards media reparations in a future where Black folks can own their stories from ideation through distribution without interference. So, again, welcome. I want to say, whether you're here now or watching later, we value your time and your contribution. And if you are here with us, just drop something in the chat so that we know that you're here and we can say hi back. Grab your water, beverage of choice, and let's just settle into what we're doing here today. The moment that we're in is both novel, it's new to us, and yet it is somewhat familiar. The world as we know it, y'all, has threatened to end many a time before. We know this because of the stories that have been shared and experienced by our kin in both blood and spirit who came before us. The griot, the storyteller, tells us who we were before they started spewing lies about our worth. This storyteller, who is part wordsmith, part prophet, gives us glimpses into who we might become if we heed warnings, learn from our mistakes, and begin to practice collaboration and care. So today, we explore this sacred lineage and legacy more in hopes that we continue to act like we know our true power and continue to utilize it in this moment and the next. And with all that said, I want to turn things over to my colleague Diamond, who will be our moderator for today. Again, thank you for being here, and over to you, Diamond.
Thank you, Benicia. I think maybe we could all go home after that. Benicia is a wonderful storyteller in her own right, and we're so grateful that you were able to open up such an important panel for us. I'm really excited for the people that we'll be featuring today. They really embody the spirit and the care and the love of storytelling and art making. And so with that, first I want to bring up Alexa WiIlliams. Alexa WiIlliams is a children's screenwriter, author, teacher, and freelance narrative strategist. They're a Black liberationalist and advocate for all things magical. Alexa writes content for kids, their families, and aligned organizations. She enjoys reading, creating, watching cartoons, gardening, practicing yoga, and anything that nurtures surrender and pleasure, and absconding to wherever, whenever. Thanks, Alexa. Welcome. Next, Next, I'd like to bring up Allen. Hey, Allen. Allen is a co-op entrepreneur and urban planner engaged in cultural design for community wealth building globally. He is the founder of Zeal, a worker-owned creative arts and social impact studio for artists across the Black diaspora, which has been featured in the New York Times, ABC Nightline, and Hyperallergic. As a conceptual artist, he designs and produces multimedia anthologies through soundscape installations and public art exhibitions. As a 2024 Open Society Foundation's Equality Fellow, he is currently producing The Remedy is Solidarity, a global multimedia anthology on reparations. Welcome, Allen. Next, we have Cheryl Thompson-Morton. Hey. Cheryl is the Black Media Initiative Director for the Center of Community Media at the Newmark J School. Cheryl works with Black media outlets through training, research, convenings, and connecting them to financial resources. Previously, she was the program director for the Linfest Institute for Journalism in Philadelphia, where she created, launched, and executed several initiatives to increase equity in news media. Thanks for joining us, Cheryl. And can we have Arianne, oh my goodness, Edwards. We just talked about names and how important they are. Arianne Edwards, welcome. Arianne is a fifth generation Angelino, archivist, civic leader, and founder of the J.L. Edmonds Project. an initiative dedicated to preserving the history and culture of the Black American West. She has curated and presented her research about Black history, memory, and legacy at several cultural institutions around the US. Her family archive stretched back to the 1850s, and her story as the keeper of her ancestral records can be found in the New York Times 1619 Project, The Root, and LA Weekly. Welcome. I'm so grateful to have everyone. And so this month for Black Narrative Power Month, Media 2070 is talking about the importance of building and wielding Black narrative power. I want to ask you all as panelists, starting with Allen, what does it look like to have Black narrative power? What does it feel like, and where have you seen it in your own life? I think you're muted, Allen.
Can you hear me now? Like the Verizon commercial?
Drop your old carrier.
But thank you, Diamond. Thank you, Media 2070, for having us here. This question around Black narrative power. And so I'm always a person who, because of my organizing background and how I was brought up, always look at the definition of words and their meaning, because they inevitably have influence over who we are, what we do, and what we end up manifesting or creating. And so, I think about power in terms of being able to have the will to be able to create something. I think about narrative in terms of the stories, the multiple stories of that make up of our lives. And when I think about Black, it's not just in terms of color, but also there's a history of a people rooted on the continent of Africa that has everything to do with our indigeneity, our spirituality, our way of being, and made up of those multiple stories that create an overall narrative of who we are. It inevitably tells us about the culture, about how we govern ourselves, our customs, our traditions. And so when I think about Black narrative power, for me and what I've experienced in my own life as someone who is a first-gen queer Ghanaian American, most of my experience really has been around community and family. And the kinds of messages, norms, societal norms that I've been brought up within my family. And I think it's fitting that Vinikia, you started out with talking about the role of the griot, which is very commonplace on the continent of Africa and throughout the diaspora as a result of it. And so I think even in the face of, we can talk about colonialism and capitalism and all of those isms, but I think just by very root of thinking of the word Black narrative power, I just think about the love of our humanity to be able to be in story with one another and learning about each other in ways that create resonance, that then create the ability for us to be able to enact the kind of futures that we want to create for ourselves and our community that is rooted in our dignity and our humanity, and is about a culture that's about communalism, finding that inside of us as individuals, we belong to each other as a community, and that's rooted in song, dance, art, lyrics. I myself, in terms of my conceptual art, I work with the xylophone, which traditionally, if you think about griots, it's one of the many instruments known on the continent that's used to tell stories through points of birth, during life course journeys, when there are rites of passage, and when people become ancestors and they pass away. So I think we have many tools, many resources, many frameworks as in our disposal as a Black people throughout the diaspora that we've been able to innovate and evolve from, that allow for us to not only survive, but to be able to then create opportunities to thrive. So that's what Black narrative power means to me.
They caught me just smiling and admiring that answer. But that's why I was so excited for this panel today, because I too am a fan of definitions and what words mean and how they come to being. And I really appreciate the ways that we are defining words like power and what it means and what the mainstream dominant media and art making spaces think it to mean. So I really appreciate that answer. I'm going to go ahead and bring on Cheryl to share with us what Black narrative power is to you. And I'll also say to all the panelists, we can jump in. There's a flow to this. You can jump in if something catches your eye. So feel free to just go where this conversation leads you.
Thank you, Diamond, Media 2070, Vanikia, Tia, for having me. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate so much the work that Media 2070 does. When I was thinking about this question, at first I was like, oh, it's hard for me to even put my finger on like how I want to express this. And then I started thinking about the Black press, which is my home and my work, what I focus on. For those of you who don't know, we're getting ready to reach the 198th birthday of the Black press in March. So there's a lot of history there. And one of the things that always sticks out to me when I read kind of that first issue of the Freedom's Journal, which was founded in 1827 in New York City, these two men started this newspaper at a time when slavery was still legal in New York, right? It wasn't even outlawed there yet. It would be a few months later. So they were writing for a populace of whom most people could not even read. They were writing for a community who could not even engage with the work that they were doing. And they did that because they believed in a future that was possible by them speaking truth to power, by them speaking about our humanity and our existence and what we need, about our connections, not just here in America, but back home to the homeland. And what becomes really even more valuable is that they helped to create the future they wanted, right? We're not where we want to be, but all of our lives are impacted by the moment those men decided we're going to start this newspaper. The Black press has been by far the second most important institution in Black American life. And it was because these two men said, I am going to take a step and I'm going to use my words to help create the future that we need. And to me, that is the lineage that we walk in now. That is the charge that we are left with to continue that work, to continue to use our words to create the future that our people need, both now and for the future. And the Freedom's Journal is a reminder to me that our words have that power. So that's what Black narrative power means to me.
You better come on, Cheryl. You better tell the people something. That the Media 2070 essay talks about, I believe it was the Boston Newsletter, one of the first like run papers in the US, founded by white Americans, and thinking about the contradictions of the foundations and what the charge and the purpose and the dreams were, is why we're here today talking about the ways that Black storytellers, Black journalists need to be trusted, and the way that our work has always paved the way for care and community and futures. So I'll go ahead and bring on Alexa to tell us what Black narrative power means to you.
Hey, y'all. Thank you all for having me. I've already been so edified. Like you said at the top of the call, we could just go now. I've been filled, I've been nourished. So when I was thinking about this question, I kept hearing kid me say, why? So like, obviously my favorite question when I was a kid was why. And so I'm sure y'all already know how my mama felt about that. But as I've gotten older and finally been able to establish and grow my own relationships with my elders that are still earthside, my new favorite question to add to the why is who. And I'm also a huge fan of how. So I think that Black narrative power is having access to the trove of information that allows or that follows those three questions: why, who, and how. Who am I? Who were you? Who can you be? Who can I be? How did you live? How did you die? How am I living? How am I loving? Why does my nose curve that way? Why did Grammy choose to migrate here or pursue banking over art? In the Black community, in the global Black community, questions like those have historically caused a lot of fear for us. And so I think Black narrative power is about acknowledging that fear with the courage to answer, to discover.
Y'all gonna keep catching me. These are some brilliant people, folks. And I'm gonna keep saying it. We could go home, but I'm gonna let the people take their time. So take your time. Arianne, can you come and tell us what Black narrative power means to you?
Yeah, I just want to thank all of you for inviting me to this panel. I feel incredibly grateful to be sharing the stage with all of you. Something that comes up for me when I think about this question is really our platforms. And I think that, when we think about the stories that we're meant to tell as Black people, having a very clear sense of how we own that story. My family started one of LA's early Black newspapers, The Liberator, in 1900. And we have all the original records of the paper. They've been handed down in our family for over 100 years. And we worked with so many different community partners to have them digitized, to have them accessible for the public, for artists, for students, for scholars. And it was important that it was free, that people could hear about the elections that were happening, to hear about love stories that are in this newspaper, to hear about the people that were fighting for us to build a new world in Los Angeles, where there were very few Black people at the turn of the century. They created this paper, gave everyone a chance to dream. And my great-great-grandfather who started it was born enslaved. He wasn't able to read and write. And so this trajectory from not having access to then realizing that you also have freedom, that you get to also think for yourself, and then create a platform for thousands and thousands of others to do the same, is a heavy dream and a heavy burden to hold on to. And I think that I've been studying our family paper and studying this, like the community development that went around the launch of this paper. And something that keeps whispering back to me is that if we don't have our home, if we don't have our sanctuary for these stories to be birthed from, then we'll miss it. We're gonna miss it. And I think about Black Twitter, you know what I mean? And how it just washed over us and cared for us and loved us and affirmed us. But now it's X, and we know homeboy is incredibly disrespectful, so we not Black Twitter anymore. And so I guess I just want to share with all of you that, like,
when we think about our platforms, when we think about where we share our stories, where we want to bring our voice forward, that has to be hallowed ground. That has to be sacred, and we have to have ownership over that space. And I think we're just such a powerful, beautiful people globally and within the diaspora that our stories will find its way no matter what. The last thing I wanted to share was something around language and something that ties us back to the continent throughout the Caribbean, through North and South America, is our tongue, is our language, and really how we have really kept some of the original syntax, the original grammatical structures that still exist on the continent, and that we know how to affirm each other, how to love each other without having to prove who we are, or I guess I just want to say that we still carry the seeds of our language on the continent, and it's our job to continue to hold it, protect it, and save it. So that's what comes up for me.
Put an Ashe in the chat if you want to hear a feature panel, a featured speaker from each one of these. That's an hour long. I'll start. Ashe. We have a comment from Colette that really touched me too at Black River Life. Sanctuary for these stories to be birthed from. That's so important and hallowed ground. And that's why we wanted to talk about the sacredness of storytelling, because we know. So let's talk about it. Let's sit in it. Let's sit in that power and that magic. You're getting a lot of ashes. So I'll see you all again. But I wanted to ask Alexa and Cheryl specifically. We heard at the beginning from some folks the lineages that they come from and the lineages that they're pulling from in this work. But for Cheryl and Alexa, I want to hear a little bit more. What lineages helped you find and root yourself in the storytelling role that you have today? In what ways are they imbued with ritual or ancestry or history? And how is that part of a longer arc of connection for you?
That is such a deep, profound question, which I feel like I don't want to be here all day trying to explain or even be trying to work through. That's probably for a therapist couch. but as far as I know, all I know of my family's history is here in the U.S., from South Carolina, from Georgia, from Tennessee, going up in the Great Migration, Indiana, and to Trenton, and Trenton is what I know of home. Georgia is what I know of home. We used to joke with my family in Trenton that my aunts, you didn't need the Trentonian. You could just go to my Aunt Brenda and Pokey, because they knew everything that was going on and they would tell you everything that was going on. And I think, from the beginning, there was a deep understanding that, like, you go to your folks to understand what's happening, and that there are a lot of people whose stories may not be listened to or believed in the higher scale mainstream, but whose voices are critical to the fabric of the community. What I learned more recently, kind of in my journey of figuring out more of family lineage and identity, my grandmother was adopted, and so the family that we feel a part of is not my birth lineage, but it is who I feel, these are my people. And so we started having these annual family reunions, and I found out I have a cousin who has been tracking back our family lineage all the way. He has been able to get it back all the way to 1800, to a plantation in South Carolina. how it started with one ancestor, and how, one ancestor that we could actually track via the census records. And he went, to the Church of Latter-day Saints, and he went all over the country to try to piece together this anthology of our family's life. And now it's a book of several hundred pages that he put together. And he's like, listen, I did this as a story of love to our family and to the people who have come before us. And reading through that, the person who we know, who, as far back as we can go, Mabel, born on the plantation, got freedom, had 10 children, some children that were able to stay with her, some that we don't know what happened to them. Some husbands that, a husband she was able to stay with post-freedom, some who were separated from her. And I think it hit me in such a different way when I said, oh my God, these are the people who brought me here. And we have a responsibility, not just to the people that we see in our lineage now, but to the people who came before us. So that was a bit all over the place. I'm sorry, because I am working through this part of the story still, but I'm grateful for the lineage that I come from. It used to be just mainly like people who I look to, like, we're not family, but like, I love the way you tell stories, or I love the way you do this. But now I can speak to it in a new way of like, no, those are my people. And this is what they did that allows me to be here today, and the sacrifices they made.
It's funny because we were, like Diamond said, we were talking about names and the importance of them before this call. And in my mind, I just heard in many of my ancestors' voice, come on, Cheryl. Because your name can't have two syllables if it's able to be said as one. So come on, Cheryl.
Everyone called me Cheryl. You're so right.
Come on, Cheryl. But the what you said really connects to what I've been thinking about the stories that are so easily dismissed. And as a children's writer, one of the greatest lessons I've learned is that time does not define us. Never has, never will. We are all happening at once and constantly. So the notion that we get older and we automatically know more, or kids automatically know less, is incredibly flawed. As many of us know, we have been controlled, alt-deleted multiple times from known existence. And yet, for all of that ignorance, our melanin gets richer, our physiologically gets richer, and spiritually. Our stories steel themselves in their gravity, in their buoyancy, in their multiplicity. Every generation, and this is something that Allen and I were talking about a couple of days ago, every generation repurposes every single thing that the previous generation has left behind, from the humor to the decay. And so I, for example, I always remind the littles in my family of whose face they stole. My little sister fully stole our daddy's face. And I will always understand myself as an answer to the question that ultimately killed my great-grandmother, which is who I am enough? So across time, across lineages, we cannot be confined to a certain age, to a certain generation. Even as I see myself, I am a child practicing to become an ancestor, practicing to become the ancestor I want to be. So while I'm in this middle world, I'll tell and I'll listen to as many stories as I possibly can to keep our spirits, especially those of our littles, aligned and well. when I find myself to answer the question of what lineages do I think are most important, I think that that piece about time is really important, because if you understand yourself as happening all at the same time, you are more easily able to find connections with people who you thought were long gone or people who are not here yet. So when I find myself wishing for an early diary from my own kin, my related kin, or to better help contextualize myself or to understand my own journey, I go to the writings of Octavia Butler, Janice Burgess, Zora Neale Hurston, and others that transcend the invisible borders of time and place and generation, because it feels like they're with me right now. And I think that's just as important as acknowledging that they did technically live, they did and technically inhabit the earth at a different time than I am. When they come into my consciousness, they live with me. And I think it's really important to, when we think about lineages, we think about time as both expansive and condensed, because it's really helped me understand that each and every story on my soul, each and every story that I listen to, each and every story that I tell will feel so present with someone one day, regardless of what time they live in. Like, so many people have talked about things that their great, great, great grandparents, right, have done. And that rediscovery, and how captivating and enriching and enlivening is that a word? I don't care. It is today. Like how nourishing that's been. And I think it's important to acknowledge that that's not confined to, we can't confine our people. We can't confine our spirits to time.
Benicia in the chat said, say that, because agreed. And even what Benicia was talking about in the beginning about how we use our power, what it looks like, and how this is new, but it's not. It's familiar and unfamiliar to us. And so I won't ask this question today, but I will be thinking about time and how do we tell stories with that in mind, and what does it mean for amplifying our power. And so, Arianne, I know I want you to jump in, because we talked about this when we chatted last week. So I want Arianne and Allen to jump in about, from the lineages that guide your work and guide your practice, what do you believe for our viewers is an important thing to remember and engage with about those lineages as we're building power towards a world where we have the power and resources to tell our stories?
I'll go, Alan, and then I'll hand it over to you. You know, I'm most of my work, probably over the last 15 years, has been about tracking, researching, finding my family history, helping others do the same through our newspaper, through census records. I mean, it's like I'm obsessed, like getting all the information in place, because I see it as a responsibility. Jefferson, my great great grandfather, wrote his liberation story in the Los Angeles Times, and he wrote about his mother-in-law, about her liberation story in the newspaper. So I know that we come from a rich history that has been documented, and that we can go back to and refer to and learn from. And I don't take it lightly that there's true power in that. But it really wasn't until I moved to Ghana, moved to the continent, that I was where the veil is quite thin between our life here and the spirit world. And I think that you know, something that happened, maybe this is maybe like a year ago. I was in the car with my husband and my daughter, and this song came on the radio, and it was a pretty upbeat song. Like there was like a beat to it, but I felt this overwhelming like sense of pain, but also like I there was like sorrow. I just began weeping. And my husband is from Ghana. Allen is my is my in-law. He's my cousin. So like for everybody, for everybody to know, family. Okay, he wasn't in the car for this story, but he might as well have been. Okay, so yeah, I just when I was listening, and I asked my husband, I was like, what is this woman saying? Because when you hear this song, it feels like it was like it shouldn't be. Why am I crying? And he said it was a song that they performed during the Homoho Festival, which is for the Ghana people that are from Jamestown and the coastal city of Accra. And this is the festival of the harvest. And it's where you give thanks for all the blessings that you receive for the year. And the song was prayers for us, for those of us that were taken, for those of us that that maybe we thought no one was thinking about us, that they also knew that we were still their ancestors. And I think for my work has been so focused on getting the tangible so that I can disseminate it with, the folks in the world, for our people to have our healing. I want us to be able to see it, touch it. But there was something about being on the continent and hearing it, receiving it, and knowing that these are also ancestors that have prayed for us, that pray for us every year. And so I just want to, the last thing I'd like to bring up is that when Toni Morrison talks about this quite a bit, when she read through a lot of the slave interviews or the formerly enslaved interviews from the during the New Deal, they hired the government hired all these writers and researchers to document this kind of last generation of enslaved people. And Toni Morrison talks about how something that came up in a lot of the interviews was that folks would talk about leaving their bodies and floating, flying away, flying back home. And so I guess what I would share with all of you on the panel and then all of you listening in is that having the tangible records is just as valuable as us tapping into our source, tapping into the ancestors that have loved us. We don't know their name. We don't need to know their name. They didn't know our names. They were praying for us, preparing for us. And I just would encourage us to hold on to the parts that we can't see just as much as we hold on to the pieces that we can touch. And I was very moved by what you shared, Cheryl, around your aunties, the ones that know all the information, and those who have compiled the stories. Most of our families, there's one person that is asked to do that work. And you have to be called to do it because they are already listening and preparing 7 generations forward and praying and trying to heal 7 generations back. So I guess I would just encourage all of us to remember, these are very important times and we have to be listening very, very well.
Yeah, I'm just taking everything in that everybody has shared so far. And I think, again, all these questions that are being posed to us, and I feel like the audience are vital for the time period that we're in now. And I feel like there's several things I want to say about lineage. As I mentioned, yes, we're in-laws. We're all family. We can talk about proper nuclear family, but I feel like within the diaspora, we're family. We get to be family. We get to choose to be family in that way. And so when I think about this question of lineages, I can speak much more directly to the fact that my family come from 2 different tribes, 2 different peoples within the country now known as Ghana, right? Due to, of course, colonialism and everything else. We have Jamestown, Accra, but we also have Jamestown, Virginia, right? And there is that connection. And there's a reason why colonialism functions in the way that it does, because it says that I'm going to get to tell you what to do. You don't get to tell me what to do. I'm telling you what to do, and I have the power to do so. European colonizers could have come to Africa and said, what could we co-create together? But that wasn't the question. The question was, how can I dominate you and extract from you and take from you? And so with that, there's a modality of healing that gets to take place when that happens. And I feel like much of my engagement with my own lineages has been around the healing that gets to take place. And Ari, as you mentioned, the Homowo Festival is a part of that, right? Homowo in the Ga is hooting for hunger. And so it's actually a relationship to the land, because they're paying reverence and gratitude for the harvest that happens every year, that they're thankful that they have the opportunity to have food, to have corn, to be able to have wheat, to be able to have food that grows from the ground, from the land, that we have a spiritual relationship with. They actually pray for the seeds. The priests and priestesses are even praying for the seeds that are being harvested and collected, that the community is taking place in the planting. And there's a rites behind that. And so the fact that on the cosmological, astrological calendars of the year, that they have the spiritual knowledge that is now creating a governance structure for how they want to live their lives, has always been a part of the Black tradition and how we build community. So when I'm talking about the communal ways that we are, from when I started, that's an example of what that looks like. We know about the Black farmers who created almanacs. That is just another version, right? That folks have been able to evolve and work from, due to, right, the transatlantic slave trade and people migrating and making sense of the conditions that they are in. But nonetheless, it still speaks to the essence of the people, their relationship to land, how they want to play, pray, eat, live together, and ultimately the decisions that they want to make together. On my dad's side, my dad is a traditional Ashanti Akan man with the name Frimpong. So go to Ghana, you hear Frimpong, it's like saying Smith or Johnson. It's like that. And I'm sure all of you know, right, the stories of Anansi the spider. Actually, Alexa and I were just talking about this, like they mentioned from our last conversation. But I think Anansi the spider is such a good example of lineage and legacy as it's tied to Black narrative power. Because here you have a story that's based on the Akan cosmology of the Ashanti people, who believe that this wise spider, Kweku Anansi, right, which I would arguably say is very queer in terms of politics, because he is shape-shifting, constantly weaving, right, these webs, creating all of these problems, only to find the solution in the problems that he has woven, right? It doesn't get any better than that in terms of using story to be able to create these spiritual instructions around how we get to live our lives. And now you find Anansi in American Gods. Anansi is the original Spider-Man. I don't care what anybody tells you. I'm a big Marvel geek, right? So Anansi the Spider, you will find Anansi everywhere. And even though he right, is Kweku Anansi, we know Anansi is Wednesday. Kweku is the day of creativity. So even in the Akan tradition in Tree, originally there's no gender pronoun for he, she. Oh no, it's like saying we, the universal we. So it's important for us to understand, as we've also already just mentioned about language, history, our culture, that every single opportunity we have to gather in these ways, we get to co-create anew. And I think it's in the remembering of our history, in the here and now, simultaneously, to be able to think about the multiplicity of our existences, tied to our landmass, but also within the ways that we've been able to innovate and thrive and survive in the diaspora, all get to be valid and don't trump one another. They're actually very intersectional and cohesive in always giving us the spiritual instructions of how we get to restore ourselves and how we get to create anew in a cyclical fashion, because as Alexa said, time is not linear, it actually is very cyclical in the ways that we get to remember ourselves, revisit our history, and then be able to create anew from that place.
Can I just add one more piece to you, Alan, briefly, Diamond, about Anansi, and just also thank you for everything that you've shared. There's a part of Anansi's story that really resonates with me and something I think we all get to consider. I also want to say Anansi is like Alan's. This is Alan's like heart, and he's also shared that with our daughter. She's also like a mini Anansi. Oh, but there's a part at the end of the folk tale where Anansi's gone through all these struggles, and he's fallen into this trouble and this, and his sons have to come and support him. And at the end, he wants to celebrate them. He wants to love them and honor them with a gift. And he's like, well, we have this moon here that rules the tides, that loves us, that provides us light through our darkness. And I don't know which sun to give it to. And instead, while he's in communication with the gods, he says, let's put this in the sky so that we can all enjoy this, so that we can all learn from this. And I just think that part of Anansi's story really highlights what you're talking about, Uncle Allen, around this idea that like we don't have to do this by ourselves, that we're all intertwined, and that we are all meant to receive this light as a collective.
That's right.
Oof. We're getting blessed today. We're so lucky that this is getting recorded and we can go back and we can sit with these things. I really, really want to thank the panelists for all the ways that you have shared, and the ways that you were just talking about, Arianne, sharing our wisdom, sharing our knowledge with one another so that we can be connected and interwoven together, and so that we can find hope and clarity in times where a lot of folks are feeling scared and hopeless. And so I'm really thankful for the ways that this panel has reminded us in where we root ourselves and how we stay rooted there, and how we stay strong in community. And so with that, I'm going to ask you all one final question, and then we can go to questions from the chat. We've got about 10 minutes left. And so y'all saw this question, so hopefully you're ready for it. But earlier this month, we had a keynote from Malkia, and Malkia was telling us about the ways that the context that's surrounding this moment, the history that's brought us here, and what our charge is for the future. And you'll be able to see clips from that coming soon from Media 2070 socials. But in it, they talked about facing the future. That part of our charge is that we must face and confront the future. And in other words, we've got Octavia Butler and a lot of other Black writers that have talked about writing ourselves into the future. And so Media 2070 is an Afrofuturist project. And so I want to hear from y'all in 3 words or more, if you're feeling called. In what ways can we use storytelling to face that future or write ourselves into it? I would go first, but I'm the moderator, so y'all can go.
I can jump in. So the 3 words that came are return, dig, and float. And I think that I do feel called to give a little bit of an explanation. Return, we're talking about the cycles of time and how creative we get to be with time. And so I think it's a return to our past selves, a return to our present selves, and return to the future, which may sound paradoxical, but I think makes perfect sense in the context of this conversation. Dig, because we talked a lot about like our relationship with the land. Allen talked about how we are people of the land, we are people of the water, we are people of the wind. We are people of this universe. We are maybe glacial. That's not what I meant to say, but like maybe the argument could be made. But we are galaxies unto ourselves, and so I think that does require some excavation. That does require some like planting of seeds, some replanting of seeds. That does also mean that we are experts in what to do when a crop fails. We understand how to spin new realities out of what can be perceived as catastrophic failures, which I think is what we're called to do in this moment. And then float, because in all of that, there can be such ease, there can be such beauty. Like Anansi should be the most stressed out entity of all time, because be causing problems that then you got to get creative to fix, but then you get blamed for stuff that's not even your fault. You even do it like that, which hearing that your daughter is like that, I'm like, okay, your daughter and I here. Cause sometimes it just be happening to you, okay? But Anansi manages to then convince the gods, right, to share light with everyone to enjoy. So that multiplicity there, that ease, that collaboration, that love is so interwoven in all of that. I won't say despair, but all of those troubled waters. So I think we're also called to float in it, around it, through it, you know?
I can go. I only have 2 words. So the words that came to mind for me are courage and connection. I think in the moment that we are in, I think sometimes it's easy to just feel like, oh, this is as bad as it's ever been, or, you know, and it's helpful. And I think this conversation keeps going back to the point of returning, like, things are cyclical and we are in a phase that is not new. It may be new to us and what this iteration looks like, but we can pull from what those who came before us have done, their lessons and examples. And I also think in times like these, speaking truth to power, speaking out for our communities, there's risk involved. And one of the, the things I loved so much about the Media 2070 essay was reading the examples of so many great, Black journalists and other folks who stood up and were courageous in the face of really difficult odds. But part of what also helps and allows us to be courageous is that we're not alone. We are part of a great community of those both past and present that can lead us and also can help us have strength. Or when I'm weak, other people can have strength and we can fight together. So those are the words that come to mind for me.
Okay, I'll go. I'm a man of alliteration, so it's going to be otherworldly, otherwise, and opulent. those are the 3 words I'm going to pick for Black storytelling. I also provide an explanation. I think through these questions that are being posed to us, what I'm recognizing, even as I'm working on this multimedia anthology on reparations, the remedy of solidarity, and being here in California, and so happy to have my cousin Ari to be able to also educate me. We're educating each other on each other's lineages and cultures. The beautiful thing about it is that I'm able to now carry the wisdom of her family lineages and how it's connected to my own. And I feel like there's wisdom that sits outside of, the traditional ways that we think about stories and facts, and how we are able to process our feelings in ways that are really indigenous to how we are as a people, and so the times whether I'm able to sit with her and my goddaughter Adina and be able to, discuss things about each other's families that we're finding, that are points of opportunities in growth and healing, and then also these just moments of gratitude, just because we're in community together, and how we celebrate each other, whether it's birthdays, people being born, like all of those things for me are things that I'm carrying a wisdom with that reminds me that those things are enough, and I don't need to then subscribe and try to fit myself into kind of knowledge base or expectations around living that are within this current way of being in this world. And I'll also say that it's also reminding me about, because of our richness of our history, hence why I use the word opulent. It's because of the richness of our history that it reminds me that we get to care for ourselves and each other very well, so that we will feel rich. There's so much that's going on, as folks here at Media 2070 opened up with, that can make us feel poor, that we are friends with poverty. And it's like, no, it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't get to be that way. And I think I'm really excited about the partnership actually that we'll have with Media 2070 on the anthology, because what I'm learning is the role that art and culture can have in changing the physical and material realities that we deal with, because inevitably art and culture are spiritual tools rooted in our tradition. And so there's so much that I've learned working from Inglewood to San Francisco to Accra, where there are common threads of the things that have harmed us as a people, where we've been met with those challenges through these stories of Anansi the spider, where there, in each of these scenarios, in each of these cities, people have been able to weave their way into new solutions. And that is a teaching that is letting me know that whenever we're able to tell our stories that create a discourse that leads us back into the wholeness of our humanity and our dignity, that we will be better together, and that our stories will continue to thrive and survive even beyond us, and so on and so forth. So I'll say that as a close.
Okay, thank you, Alan, and everybody. I know I want to be conscious of our time, Diamond, so I'll keep my part quick. My words are restoration, devotion, and connection. And I think, and I'll do it quick. I think we have a beautiful opportunity to restore our faith in each other and our community, and to restore our sense of pride and power, and our softness, our kindness, how we show up for each other. And I think devotion has been coming up for me, because I just think that there's something a little bit deeper in devotion than love. Love is an action, it's a verb, but when we devote ourselves to our loved ones, to each other, it's a practice. It's love in practice. So, yeah, I guess I would invite all of us to consider that. And then connection, I think, is really at the center of all that. It's saying, as we're restoring, as we're shedding, as we're letting go of old stories, old narratives, and putting on new ones of opulence and power and all these other things, that we get to be devoted to that practice of self-love and love for our community and each other.
You know, I don't really want to have anything else to say because I think that that is a perfect place for us to end at. But I really want to show so much gratitude to our panelists, Arianne, Alexa, Allen, and Cheryl. Thank you so much for being in community and practicing with us today and with our viewers. I think I left with a word on my heart. I hope everybody that was watching did. And I'm excited to continue to be in partnership with you all and to practice Black narrative power all the time, not just in February. So thank you, everybody, for joining. Thank you.